Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. What's going on, everybody? We had a great week of fights. Last weekend was, it was a great way to really ride off into the sunset and say goodbye to the year of 2020. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson headlined the card, and he faced Geoff Neal, who he defeated. So this episode, I really wanted to just go over what happened in the past week concerning the fights that we watched and also some of the MMA news that came up. I want to do more and more episodes like these just to really recap and really digest everything that happened in the past week. I think this is a good way to take a look at what we learned, what's happening in MMA, and really kind of just unravel it. Because sometimes this sport can get very difficult to unwind and figure out what is happening in each situation. It feels like when it comes to the fighters, when it comes to the promotions, they're having their own kind of either verbal fight by themselves or they're actually fighting. So I think this might be a great way to kind of unravel all of that, like I said before. Let's start off with last weekend's fights. So let's start off with some of the fights that I talked about in my preview show. One fight that I was really interested in was Deron Winn versus Antônio. The full fight was a great showcase for Deron Winn. It was a must-win fight for Deron, being that he was on somewhat of a skid. I think the UFC also didn't love the fact that he's fighting in a weight class where he's so small. And like I said in my preview show, he's doing it because of his mentor, Daniel Cormier, who fights in a bigger weight divisions. Like he fights in 205 and he fights in heavyweight. But I don't think that's the same for Deron Winn. I don't think the UFC is the biggest fan. When it comes to that, I think it has a lot of, the Japanese love this kind of stuff. And they love kind of freak show fights and whatnot. I think Deron Winn is not completely in that category because the Japanese, some of those promotions did some crazy stuff. But Deron Winn is always someone that you want to root for because of the size disadvantage that he has. When you see him against someone like Antônio here, it's kind of like in your head you go like, how's this guy going to be able to win against this guy? And Deron Winn won. And he did that by using his wrestling, which I think even Bisping was mentioning it. Deron Winn didn't use his wrestling that much when it came to his past fights. I don't know his exact background, but when you're wrestling at AKA with those monsters over there, seeing DC wrestle, seeing Luke Rockhold wrestle the times that he's actually there, because people forget how underrated Luke Rockhold's wrestling is. And then obviously seeing Khabib Nurmagomedov and his crew wrestle that Dagestani style, it has a big rub on someone. On top of that, Deron Winn, like I mentioned in the preview show, he coaches high school wrestling with Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier and mini Daniel DC or mini DC as people like to call him. They're really close. So they've obviously rubbed off on each other. But the one thing that I really wanted to see was how would he come back from his, I believe, 9-month hiatus due to USADA catching him for using amphetamines. This is one thing that people don't understand. And a lot of the casual fans see this. They see that a guy is off for 9 months and they're like, oh my God, this is going to affect him negatively in terms of the timeline. But that's not really the case. The way that a fighter actually gets affected by this is not by the actual layoff time, because 9 months could be the time between a regular fight. You could have a long layoff. This is not like basketball where you're forced to not play for a certain number of games. Fighters do it all the time. Like, look at Cowboy right now. Cowboy is doing the jiu-jitsu tournament, Chael Sonnen's jiu-jitsu tournament, but he usually fights consistently. I think he does 3-4 fights a year. I may be mistaken. He might be even doing more than that, but he has a lot of fights. But then you get other fighters, like look at Conor, for example. In 2020, he had 1 fight, which was against Cowboy. But sometimes there's just layoffs, and that doesn't really affect a fighter as much as the mental kind of struggle that you might have after being caught for something. While reading some articles, I only found Deron Winn being caught for amphetamine use. I don't know what that exactly means. It might be some recreational drug or something like that. But whatever it might be, there's certain effects that come with it. We've seen it in the past where some people have been caught for steroids, and it just affects the rest of their career. They're just not the same fighter they once were. So I wanted to see what would happen with Deron Winn. And he came out level-headed, and he did what he needed to do to get the win. So the next fight I want to talk about is Greg Hardy's loss to Marcin Tybura. I talked about this in my previous show, that Marcin Tybura is going to be one of the biggest tests for Greg Hardy. And this is because this is a guy that in Tybura that's been fighting for a little while now. And he's got most aspects of the fight game down pat. I don't think he's going to win any world titles anytime soon, but he is on, I believe, a 4-fight win streak at the moment. So who knows with that? But Greg Hardy really needed to show us what he was made of in all dimensions of the fight game. In the first round, Greg Hardy looked great. As many commentators said that he might have just smoked Marcin Tybura in the first round. But then we saw the grit and determination of Marcin Tybura. I won't even say that. I'll just say the experience, actually. The experience versus the athletic guy. Big Brown talks about this all the time. The fact is that there's some people that you're just going to beat just by your pure athletic ability. That's what Greg Hardy has. He has that pure athletic ability. But when you face a guy that's been doing it for so long, that has been training at a young age, that has been in this fight game for a very long time, how are you going to fare? And this is what we saw here. it was a lot of experience, some, I believe, cardio issues, and just not enough time in that octagon. I think that's what happened to Greg Hardy. Now, I don't think the UFC is going to cut him or anything. There's no way they will. I think that's just due to his name and notoriety coming from the NFL, being a Pro Bowler and being one of the best athletes to come into the UFC. And we're going to talk about this later when I come into the MMA news and boxing news. But this shows you that it takes a certain type of person to jump in that octagon or jump in that ring and face a person that's been doing it for years. Face a person that has been doing it since they were a little kid. I think that's what a lot of these YouTubers and athletes don't understand, that these aren't normal people they're facing. These are people that have dedicated their life to harm other people. This is a totally different animal that you're facing. This isn't no YouTuber. This isn't no basketball player that's coming in and thinking that his athletic ability is going to be able to trump someone. These are trained killers. These are people that have dedicated their life, and I'm going to say it again, to hurting someone else. You get what I mean? Like, it's like asking a world-class chef. It's like going against a world-class chef. We watch all these shows like Hell's Kitchen and all this kind of stuff that's on TV. And it's like getting your grandma or someone to face Gordon Ramsay in a cook-off. It's not the same. These are world-class killers. These are people that are not the same as you and me. Like I said, I don't think Greg Hardy's getting kicked out of the UFC anytime soon. But I think the next couple fights that Greg Hardy is going to have are going to be very calculated, and they're going to have to play to his strengths. It looks like he's developed a pretty good stand-up game. So maybe don't put him against any jiu-jitsu practitioners or people that rely on their jiu-jitsu anytime soon. But this happens. You get these celebrities in the sport. They bring a lot of eyeballs. I'll tell you right now that if Greg Hardy's fighting, I'm not going to miss it. It's just an interesting experiment. It's funny with these kind of fighters. Like when Brock Lesnar first came in, a lot of people were like, okay, he's a WWE guy, has some wrestling experience. But when that experiment succeeded in the way that it did, Brock Lesnar won the belt, he was destroying people. It outweighs, the experiments that went wrong, like CM Punk, and I don't know, there's a bunch. I was just going to name off like two people that CM Punk fought, like Mickey Gall and stuff like that, but like the way that we won with getting to see Brock Lesnar fight, that outweighs the missteps. I'm not saying Greg Hardy's a misstep so far, but it didn't look great in that second round. So let's move on. Rob Font defeats Marlon Moraes. Now listen, if I was going to tell you that Rob Font was going to beat Marlon Moraes, it would be very difficult for me to say that. And now this is not anything against Rob Font. It's just that, and I think this is what happens with fighters like these, like Marlon Moraes, where he had such a legendary status with the striking ability that he has. And know what I said? I said he still has it. When I watch Marlon Moraes fight now, I don't think it's an issue of him not being ready for the fight. I don't think it's an issue of him being chinny either. It looks like a mental issue. Because after I saw that one time when Mark Henry brought up his family in the favelas of Brazil after the first or second round, I knew that there was some sort of mental issue there. Brendan Schaub likes to bring it up because he feels, and I feel the same way, that when you have to bring up ammunition like that, when you have to bring out the big guns and talk about your family in Brazil, in the favelas, then there's something going on, especially in the first or second round or whenever it was early on in the fight. Marlon Moraes, this is incredible, but this might be a mental issue. This might be due to the fact that he's getting older, but I still remember all of the crazy knockouts that he's had. He's kicked people into other dimensions. And whenever a fighter like that comes, you remember those old fights that they've had. That's why when I watched Tony Ferguson, I had the same thoughts. You think of all the legendary fights that he's had. You think of that arrogant kind of attitude where he just went in, he didn't care. And then when you saw Tony Ferguson not have that attitude and it shifted, you wonder what's going on. That's what I feel about Marlon Moraes. Marlon Moraes is still up there in the 135-pound division. I believe he can still take on top 5 guys, but he's got to get over whatever he wants to get over, or he needs to get over. And he's got to do it quick. He's not young. I mean, it's just like, this might be over for him. This might be the last kind of fight that we see of his where he's somewhat like himself. We might go into the territory where he might be getting knocked out all the time. That's not great for his health either. But I struggle because when I see him, I remember the crazy knockout artist he was. Maybe he has to change up his game plan. Maybe he can't be that aggressive striker anymore. The biggest example of someone that switched up their career like this was Alistair Overeem. Some people might want to mention his past and maybe drug use and all that kind of stuff. But that guy switched up his total game plan when going into fights. Being tactical, being more defensive, and making sure to use what he's given. You know, everybody's given some gifts. You got to figure out what your gift is, and you got to be able to implement it. Alistair Overeem does that now. Maybe Marlon Moraes has to figure out what his new kind of fighting style is. Maybe he can't be that marauding striker anymore. Maybe he's just got to switch it up. So Anthony Pettis defeats Alex Morono. Now, this fight was it was a good fight. Anthony Pettis, it's kind of similar to what I was saying when it comes to Marlon Moraes. I always remember that spectacular style that he once had. I talked about it in the preview show where I said, I think Anthony Pettis went into 3 stages of his career. At the beginning, he was Showtime Pettis. In the middle, he focused on jiu-jitsu and other aspects. And now he's very calculated and uses all aspects of his game to figure out the best way to defeat his opponent. That's what Anthony Pettis did here. Now, to UFC fans and to people that know his past, it was meh. It was okay. Anthony Pettis of the past would have went through Alex Morono no problem. But this is where this piece of MMA news, which just came out today, I think it just hit right before I recorded this podcast. And this goes into MMA news, but Anthony Pettis is leaving the UFC and testing free agency. He's been with the company for 12 years about. And, he's leaving with class. He's not going out in a blaze of glory and cussing out everybody and saying bad things. But he's going to go test out other organizations now. Who knows where he's going to go? His brother is in Bellator. And so I predict that will be the best place for him to go. Also, I'll talk about this in my MMA news, but one of my thoughts is like all of these UFC fighters getting cut. And in some cases, some fighters just can't work with the UFC and they have to switch. So is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? We'll chat about that in a bit. But Anthony Pettis gets a win in the UFC and then leaves. It bumps up his stock. And I think this is the best case scenario for him. In the UFC, he chatted after the fight and he said that he would like to make a run at the belt. Obviously, he's not going to do that anymore. But in another organization, I believe he could. I think he can make a run at the belt. Maybe he's just not UFC caliber anymore. But it'd be fun to see him. Maybe with a little bit lesser competition, we can see old Showtime back. Or hey, maybe this is just Anthony's style. This is the way that he's adapted using his gifts. Okay, so the next fight I wanted to talk about was Jose Aldo defeating Marlon Vera, Chito Vera. You can't count Jose Aldo out. Now, this is also a test for Chito Vera, where the fact was that he beat Sugar Sean in a way that was questionable. Did Sugar Sean go into that fight with his leg already injured? Or was it Marlon Vera? Or was Marlon Vera able to... I mean, he did hit him with the shot. I don't like the argument of like the fight doesn't count or whatever, because the guy goes in with an injury already. But we did have the questions, right? Because the fight did end so early for Sugar Sean. But Marlon Vera did prove something to us, that he's capable of fighting elite fighters. Jose Aldo, who time and time again shows us why he was the apex predator at 145. He was the greatest of all time at 145. You're just slaughtering everybody. And Marlon Vera, even though he fought a Jose Aldo in his advanced age, showed us that he's capable of hanging with these guys. Can't count Jose Aldo out. Now, Jose Aldo also mentioned that he wants to fight TJ Dillashaw next. I think that's a great fight. I think that's a great fight to either get Jose Aldo back into title contention or get TJ Dillashaw back into the title picture. I mean, if either of them win, I think that's a title shot. Because we did see that Jose Aldo was able to hang with Petr Yan. No matter how you see that fight, I mean, you can't say that he's not able to hang with him. And if TJ Dillashaw can defeat Jose Aldo, then, I mean, we're sending him back to fight for that bantamweight belt. He's got too big of a name not to. So the last fight of last weekend's card was Stephen Wonderboy Thompson defeating Geoff Neal. I think it was elementary. Wonderboy defeated Geoff Neal. I mentioned it. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is in his advanced age of 38. So, I mean, can you really send him to fight for the belt? And can the UFC really back him? I know that's a tough question to ask, because if you deserve to fight for the belt, you should fight for the belt. But the UFC is going to think of this like a business, which they are. Are they going to be able to back a guy in his advanced stage? And I mentioned this in my preview. That Wonder Boy is not Wonder Boy. He's Wonder Man. He's an older man that relies on his quickness and his agility to get out of sticky situations. Doesn't keep his hands up. Really relies on his movement. Reminds me of Roy Jones, actually. The fact is, he relied on his speed. He relied on his quickness. He fought in an unorthodox way. And I think it really it hit him hard. But we haven't seen that with Wonderboy yet. Wonderboy's still able to evade shots and still able to read shots. But when will that time come? And I think this is the question that you can ask about any fighter. When is that time going to come where father time catches up? But I think that even though the UFC is going to think about this in a business, with the business mentality of being able to back a person like this, like, are they going to be able to back him? That's kind of the question that I have, and I want to ask is, are we going to be able to back this guy? And I think that if he is able to get a couple more wins, he deserves to fight for that belt. It depends on who he fights, and speaking of that, he called out Masvidal after that. I don't think Masvidal is going to take that fight. I know he wants redemption, but I think Masvidal is too much of a name now. He's been doing all this crazy stuff where he's on the UFC cover for the game. This guy's a big star now. Is he going to be able to risk it all for an unorthodox fighter who doesn't look like he's aging, who defeated him before? Is he going to take that risk? I think there's other fights for Masvidal that he would rather take, like the Kobe Covington fight. That's a layup for him. They've been jawing at each other forever. So before we move on from the Wonderboy Thompson fight, I just wanted to shout out Geoff Neal. Thank God he got back into the octagon. It looked like everything was good. He was coming off of congenital heart failure, which is super scary. So I just wanted to give my not condolences, but I wanted to give my good thoughts to him, because what he did was pretty amazing himself, and I think it's being underplayed. Is that the fact was the guy was on death's door. Literally. We say that about fighters that cut some weight, but this guy was having heart failure. And now he's fighting in the toughest MMA organization in the world against one of the toughest strikers in the world. So I don't think we should overlook Geoff Neal. So let's get into some MMA news. Let's talk about what happened last week. Last week was interesting because of so many reasons. I mean, we got people from outside of the sport partaking in the sport, getting involved. It all makes this lovely island that we call MMA into a global sport. At one point we were, it was very, how would you say it? Like, it was, you would go somewhere and you would ask someone, hey, did you watch the UFC? And they'd be like, no, are you kidding me? I don't watch that. But now you go anywhere, everybody's got an opinion on the UFC. Look at me. I started a podcast about it. It's just fun to see. It's fun to see everybody getting involved. So let's go into some of these topics. The first one that I have written down was Dillon Danis versus Jake Paul. And this occurred during a food truck diary that Brendan Schaub hosts. Now, Brendan Schaub was interviewing Dillon Danis. Jake Paul rolled up in a pickup truck, threw water balloons and toilet paper, which was an interesting choice, both of them being interesting choices, and throwing them at at Dillon Danis. Dillon Danis running after the truck and saying that he wants to jump on and strangle. I want to talk about two things about this. If Dillon Danis got onto the back of that truck, he would have strangled and broke everybody's limbs. This whole nonsense of how would a UFC fighter fare in a street fight? Listen to me. Like I said at the beginning of this podcast, these are trained killers. Killers that you're antagonizing and throwing water balloons at. If Dillon Danis got into the back of that truck, it would have been game over for everybody there. He studies the art of strangulation. The little bit of boxing that Jake Paul has done will not help him when he's grappling one of the world's best. Next thing I want to talk about when it comes to this. I think this whole thing was like set up. Come on. we can't pretend like this wasn't set up. Like, I mean, Jake Paul's older brother, Logan Paul, was on the Food Truck Diary before Dillon Danis. Now, I get it that maybe Brendan Shaw might have mentioned it and they might have shown up, but they showed up at the exact time and everything was just laid out perfectly. Come on. And even in the Below the Bell podcast, which I love. I love that podcast. I listen to it all the time. But the fact is that he mentioned, Brendan Shaw mentioned a bunch of times that he's the Vince McMahon of this. I'm not a wrestling guy, but I know the fact is that Vince McMahon staged everything that happened in WWE. You're calling yourself Vince McMahon of the sport? Come on, man. But no shame in your game. It's all good. No worries. Do whatever it takes to sell the fight, but like one of the latest Joe Rogan podcasts with Jay Prince, he's a boxing manager, and he mentioned when he was managing Floyd, in some occasions he would tell Floyd to go push his opponent, and it would kind of be all for show, trying to hype up the fight. If managers were telling Floyd to go hype up a fight like that, then what would you imagine these YouTubers would be doing? So I think it's totally set up. If it's not set up, I mean, I think someone, either Dillon Danis and Jake Paul, are in it together. Brendan Schaub or one or the other might be in it. I don't know. I just think there's a collaboration going on here. Anyways, on to the next. Over last weekend, as well as the UFC, we saw Canelo Alvarez defeat Callum Smith in a dominant fashion. First of all, I just wanted to comment on the fact that there was fans there. That looks like a COVID hotbed. It's tough seeing that. I'd really love to have fans back. I would really love to go to a fight again. Sit down, be in that atmosphere. But the fact is that now when I look at that, and this was at what, 20% capacity? I'm like, oh my God, like, do I really want to be there? Do I really want to be in that COVID? I don't know what you call it, but like the COVID petri dish? I don't think so. Next, I mean, the way that DAZN did it, this fight, I mean, Canelo's leaving DAZN now. He left Oscar, and now he's leaving DAZN. He's becoming a free agent. But the way that DAZN did the presentation with the fire and the walkout and whatever, I really liked it. With the mariachi band, I thought that was a good touch. For the UFC to do something like that would be super expensive. I remember when Conor McGregor had that walkout with Sinead O'Connor, and Chad Mendes had, I forget who he had, but whoever he had for his walkout and all the music and the drama and all that kind of stuff. Dana White was talking about it and how much money he lost doing that. But it's always fun to see it in boxing. Boxing does it differently. I enjoy it. But let's talk about the actual fight. The fight itself, I mean, it was a masterclass by Canelo Alvarez. For a guy at his height to go against someone like Callum Smith and dominate him in his own weight class. It's incredible to see. And whenever I see Canelo dominate someone like this, especially with all the chips stacked against him, it shows how much he's just down to fight. He's down to do whatever it takes to be the greatest of all time, or one of the greatest of all time. I think he's the pound for pound best right now. No questions asked. He just fights whoever he needs to fight and gets it done somehow. Yeah, I just think that Canelo Alvarez, the way that he was doing it, the way that he didn't look like he was uncomfortable being at that weight class, knowing what it took to be Callum Smith, because Callum Smith is no joke either. It looks like Canelo is going after chumps, but they're not. These are great fighters, and he's making them look like amateurs. So let's see what Canelo does after this. I mean, Triple G was calling him out. I don't think he wants to fight Triple G again. I think he's done with that. But let's see. It's great to see Canelo come back. So next thing I want to talk about was Dana White mentioned and told everybody that Rose Namajunas doesn't want to fight for the belt anymore. Rose's husband, Pat Barry, then comes out and denies this claim, saying that she is down to fight whoever. She's ready to fight for that belt again. This is weird. This is really weird. When Dana comes out and says like bad things about his fighters just to get them to fight again, it's tough to see. If it's tough to hear about, actually, because then maybe a couple months later, he's trying to sell us and tell us that, oh, what I was telling you a couple months ago is not true. It's like a teeter-totter back and forth. And I've seen this so many times. Where he's literally come out and said that X fighter doesn't want to fight another guy. Or even at the beginning, maybe summer, Dana and Conor were fighting. Dana and Conor were talking about, you know, the Instagram text message came out, and Dana said that was a horrible move on Conor's end, and Conor was going back and forth with Dana White, and now look at them. In a couple weeks from now, we're going to see Conor fight again. And Dana White is singing Conor's praises. So what are we supposed to believe, Dana? Are we supposed to believe that Rose doesn't want to fight for the belt? Or do we believe that she does in a couple months? Because I don't believe Rose Namajunas doesn't want to fight for that belt. There's so much that comes with it. I mean, you get more money, you get more notoriety, all that good stuff. I know this is a tough year for Rose. Her and her family got really affected by COVID, but I still think that she really wants to fight for that belt. She wants it back. So after that, let's chat about Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero, we learned about maybe a week before that he's leaving the UFC. But new news comes out saying that Yoel Romero is not leaving because he got kicked out of the UFC or anything like that. It was because he couldn't work with the UFC. The UFC still saw the potential in him. But now he's joining Bellator. And I think the news that came out before that Bellator and Winn and PFL didn't want to sign him was due to the fact that they heard rumors like this. The rumor goes like this, where Yoel Romero denied a bunch of fights. He said that I don't want to fight these guys. I'm not going to fight these guys. And that forced the hand of the UFC. That kind of told the UFC that, hey, like, this guy's not down to fight. This guy, we got to let him go. He's in his advanced age. I know he's superhuman. He's still got abs at like 42 or whatever he is. And, I mean, even though he's still superhuman, we still might see that sudden, just all of a sudden snap, and then he's normal again. The UFC doesn't want to take that chance, especially with the guy that is going back and forth at the UFC like this and not taking fights. I think, like, whatever fight he was given, after that, he's fighting right for the belt, especially if he fights like Yoel Romero and not like the Yoel Romero that we saw in the Izzy fight. If he fights like that, then he's going to fight for the belt again. So I don't see what was going on. I mean, this sucks. Just by a little miscommunication, we get one of the best UFC fighters not to fight or not to have the belt get kicked out of the UFC. It's tough. And this also brings up the question, is Bellator turning into... Because I've always thought that it was the home for UFC fighters that just can't fight in the UFC anymore. But now, with Yoel Romero going there, and I assume Anthony Pettis going there, and I mean Machida, all these guys that are in Bellator, this is really making Bellator feel like the second class fight organization who I don't think they want to be. Obviously, if you're in this game, you're trying to be the best. And it's tough to say that Bellator is the best when they're hiring all of the UFC scraps. It's tough to say that. But I think Yoel and Bellator can do some fun things together. It's just, like I said, it's sad to see that a little bit of frustration and honestly, a little bit of like weird actions that Yoel Romero and his team did caused him to get kicked out of the UFC. So some quick fight announcements. Alexander Volkanovski likely to fight Brian Ortega in February. That'll be a fun fight. I mean, Brian Ortega looked great against Korean Zombie. I mean, let's see if he comes back with the long hair. I don't think he has enough time to grow it to the length that he had it. But in more interesting news, I think it'll be a fun fight. Let's see what Volkanovski does after this Max Holloway, after these Max Holloway fights that he had. I get it. I get his camp. They don't want to fight Max Holloway anymore. It's kind of boring now. They fought him multiple times. I think Alexander just wants to show everybody what he's actually made out of and show that he's able to defeat other fighters and then go on to the run and go on to a run that is able to put him up there with the Max Holloways and the Jose Aldos of 145. So next fight announcement that I thought was interesting. Frankie Edgar is going to be facing Corey Sandhagen, targeted for UFC Fight Night 187. That'd be a fun fight. Is it the right fight? Maybe, but it's always fun to see Frankie Edgar back in there. And I mean, Corey Sandhagen, we've seen him do some crazy stuff now. And that'll be a fun fight. Amanda Nunes is going to be fighting Megan Anderson. Is Megan Anderson ready to fight the women's GOAT? That's the question. And I think this will bring life into that 145-pound women's weight division. I think seeing Megan Anderson face some of the competition that she's faced, hopefully she's been able to learn, especially from that Holly Holmes fight. I mean, I think that was a big learning lesson for her. But I think this is just a way to bring back life into that 145-pound weight division. We've seen some fighters like Kayla Harrison and some boxers come into MMA. And this might be the way that the UFC is trying to entice these people into that weight division, because it looks like the stars from other sports like judo and boxing are coming in at a heavier weight class. 145 might be too light. Those other girls are coming in at 155, but maybe they'll make an exception to fight in the biggest organization, being the UFC. Last thing I wanted to talk about, this goes with the Jake Paul food truck incident. Jake Paul offers $50 million to Conor McGregor. Now, listen, let's chat about this. Does Conor McGregor need $50 million? No. He's up there all the time in the Forbes sports people, the richest sports people in the world. He's up there. Multiple companies. He just Conor doesn't need this. But I think Jake Paul needs to be careful with the words that he's saying. I don't think he understands the animal that he's dealing with when it comes to Conor McGregor. He slowed down a little bit. But we saw after the Cowboy fight, when Joe Rogan interviewed him, that animal came out for a bit. This is not... It's tough to say. Like, it's funny because when fighters start talking like this, they start making more money and they're able to get more sponsorships and all this kind of stuff. But Jake Paul is taking it to another level that's kind of... it's rough, man. Especially when you're comparing it to the rest of MMA or boxing in general. It's tough to kind of bring that YouTube kind of thing into the real fight sports. These guys need to understand that there's different sports. I get it. But then there's this sport that's by itself and it's called fighting. Boxing, whatever. The karate combat, this, that, whatever. It's all fighting. And it takes a different type of human being to be in there. We've seen it multiple times that a guy with less athletic ability doesn't have the height, doesn't have the reach, all the cards stacked against him or her, and they're still able to pull it out. Why is that? Because they're a fighter. There's something different. That's why I think the Jake Paul and Conor McGregor situation needs to be taken lightly. because these are people that should be dealt respect. Because if you don't offer them respect, they're gonna come after you. Right now, Conor McGregor is like ignoring him or not even talking about him. That's making him more frustrated, and then making him go after Dillon Danis and all these other people. And I think that's the right move. Just show that you're better than him. That he's a guy that actually gets paid a lot of money to do what he does best. Jake Paul gets paid a lot of money as well to box, but it's not his bread and butter. No matter what he says, I can't believe that he's spending more time in the gym with world-class trainers compared to Conor. I just can't see it. Conor McGregor has been in the game for so long now. There's certain tricks that you learn. You start a new job, you do anything. After a little while, there's certain tricks and things that you learn. And is Jake Paul able to learn those in the short amount of time? I don't think so. I think Conor's been in this game for too long, and he's got one of the best teams around him. And on top of that, you got to deal a little bit more respect to him. That's all I feel about that. Let's see where it goes. I don't think this fight's going to happen, but I mean, who knows? Maybe the Dillon Danis and Jake Paul fight happens, and we'll talk about that. Anyways, it was a good week in the sport. It was fun chatting about it. If you guys could please like, subscribe, give 5 stars on the different platforms. That would be greatly appreciated. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to listen to this. And I'll talk to you guys soon. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.